Good afternoon. I'm Renee Wyckoff, Research Design Engineer at L&E Research. We're so glad you could join us today for the first webinar in a series of webinars hosted by L&E in 2018. Our webinar series will focus on the 6 steps to perfect qual, and today's webinar will focus specifically on step 1, qualitative research design. Our webinar series ties in with our white paper series as well, so we'll be sending you a copy of the white paper in addition to the recording of this webinar, should you be interested in revisiting or sharing with your colleagues that couldn't attend. Let's kick things off and get started with meeting our 3 guest speakers today. We have Tia Maurer, Group Scientist with Procter & Gamble. Tia, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I have over consumer-centric research and product development at Procter & Gamble. I currently work in the beauty care products researchers, providing them leadership and expert design advice to the project teams as they execute and analyze their consumer research for their project initiatives. And in my spare time, I enjoy ballroom dancing with my husband, Jason, and I serve as a volunteer teacher for students seeking their GED.
That's wonderful, thank you. Next, we have David Harris, author of The Complete Guide to Writing Questionnaires, How to Get Better Information for Better Decisions. David, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I spent most of my career as a buyer of market research. So I spent a lot of years at GlaxoSmithKline, then later at a company called MERS. And a few years ago, after publishing this particular book, I went out and I do independent work for clients now. So that's basically my background, and I'm here in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina.
Thanks, David. And next we have Jim White, founding partner at Reality Check. Jim.
Yeah, so Reality Check is an inside space consulting company. I got started in this business many years ago. I was originally a newspaper reporter working in the state of Kentucky, which is where I now live, and got diverted into the world of ad agencies and worked as an account planner for several years before going out on my own and working with my business partner in founding Reality Check, which we did back in 2002. And I've been doing that ever since. And seeing this makes me jealous. I need to write a book because David's bio looks much longer than mine because he's got the book title there. So get on that.
The book is very long.
Right.
This is a note to everyone on the call. Talk to me before you start writing a book.
All right, it's good to get started with a little laugh. So let's get started. Tia, given that all projects start with a business problem, walk us through how you first start to consider market research as a necessary step to solving a problem or a question. Is there a process or an economic impact that must first be met?
Sure. So in general, I would say my approach has always been to apply the scientific method to all my projects. Researchers typically come to me with an unanswered question or a hypothesis that needs to be confirmed as we think about research design. And the scientific method always begins by starting with that unanswered question. But the first step beyond that is to figure out if that question can be answered with existing data or knowledge. You know, what do we already know? So before we go out and spend any money, I think it's prudent to search through literature, tap into industry or company experts, search the internet, or leverage other resources to see if we already have knowledge to answer the question that they have. And if we don't have the answer, then and only then should we really consider market research. So in short, I think the answer is just don't reinvent the wheel. If we already have the answer, sometimes that answer or that search actually leads to more questions that then we have to do research for, but I wouldn't reinvent the wheel if the answer already exists.
Thank you. David, what would you add from your perspective?
Yeah, from my perspective, you know, all needs for research, when people come with a big business issue, there's some kind of tension, okay? And what's really critical is the research planning part of it. And that's where, you know, I always write a paragraph or two that tells what the tension is. What's the current status of affairs? What's really going on? What do we already know? What do we not know? And so people should be able to read that paragraph or two and say, oh my gosh, we really need to do the research. Now, the critical part is defining the decision or decisions that the research will support. And I learned over the years that I have to do that as a declarative statement. We will decide how to position the product. We will decide who we want to target. And once we figure out really what those decisions are, then it's critical that we then think, what information do we need to really help inform that decision? And so often people come in with, what they call a business issue or whatever, or a business problem. Then when we think through, gosh, what are the decisions that this is going to support? It may change what we do altogether, and so to me, the critical thing is being able to focus on that. Got it. Jim, what would you have to add here?
Yeah, I mean, just dovetailing on both of those points, that's our process as well. Oftentimes we'll have clients coming to us saying right out of the gate, hey, we need to do focus groups, or we need to do ethnography. And what we always try to do in that situation is back them up and say, wait a minute, let's not go straight to methodology here. What are the decisions you're trying to make, or what actions do you need to take coming out of this? And T is right. That not often, but some of the times when we work through those decisions that have to be made, through that process, the client will realize, well, we're already sitting on the information that's going to help us make that decision. We've already have that. And I think it's our responsibility as a vendor of research to tell a prospective client that, well, hey, in this case, then you don't need to commission a new study. You need to mine what you already have. Because, in our business, the worst thing that you can have happen is to commission a study, spend the client's money, and then at the back end have them say, well, this doesn't give us anything new. Working through that process of what decisions do you have to make, and then asking what information do you need to make those decisions, heads that off right at the outset. So we know that what we're designing for the client is going to be actionable, because it started with an action. It started by defining the decision or the action that needs to be taken.
Right. So let's assume that an issue has been identified and that research is the next step. Tia, what would be your normal method of getting to the why, or the problem that is driving the research?
A lot of times I have a discussion with the project teams. We have here at Procter & Gamble what's called a consumer research proposal, where we have to get it down on paper, and we're talking about the background, kind of, why are we thinking about doing research? What do we already know? And then what is the research question? And then what does success look like for us, and what action are we going to take as a result of that? And usually that background of the project gives us details on the need and the why behind the research. And then the question helps drive the methodology and what we should do next.
Got it. David, what types of questions might you ask your client to determine the purpose of their research?
Yeah, basically, I usually go through a process because I know there are decisions that the company needs to make, right, relative to their brand or their company. So a lot of times it's around, finding out, well, to me, I call this the marketing golf swing. There are 5 key decisions that all brands need to make. What benefit are you offering? Who are the target or targets? How do you position the product to each of those targets that conveys that positioning? What story do you tell? What messages do you tell to convey that positioning? And then how do you deliver that story, that positioning to each of the targets? So a lot of my questioning is around, what are those for these brands? A lot of times the benefit isn't really all that clear. Maybe the targeting isn't quite right. Maybe there's something wrong with the positioning or the messaging. And so I think working that through, and then of course writing that down in a research plan, which, my book is on how to write questionnaires, but it's really about research planning, and that's part 1 of it, is to get all that figured out before you then launch into something. So that's usually where I go. The other thing is that when we define decisions, like we will decide, who are our key targets for this product, or we will decide, how to position the product. Then what information do we need? Writing that down as questions. I always tell people, let's not write down a question we already know the answer to, okay? And so nothing should be, we already knew that, because we don't write down the question if we already know that. I also say what's interesting is that I went through this process with a consultant many years ago, where we worked with brand teams and we said, what do you know about your brand? What do you not know? And what do you know that you have data to support? And what do you know that, well, it's kind of like just a myth around here. And there's so much that falls into that category where, you know, this is what we think, but honestly, we just don't really know. So I think those processes help.
Got it. Jim, how would you approach this?
Well, you know, David mentioned the writing things down, and that's something that I think is critical here. I mean, I have a bias to the written word because I come out of a journalism background, and newspaper was my trade. So I was sort of weaned as a writer initially. And, you know, there's a great David McCullough, the biographer, quote, writing is thinking. And it's so true. So as you're working through this process and we're answering these questions about what are the decisions that need to be made, what's the information that you need to make those decisions, you know, articulating a research plan is one thing, having a conversation about it, but nothing forces a clarity of thought and working through the details of a plan like writing it down. So, you know, if there's a format, and there's a format that we use, and if you don't have one, you should, but something that forces the answers to those questions to be conveyed in written form, because it does force a clarity of thought, and it does force a connection from you know, it prevents you from making conceptual leaps in a way that really no other form of expression does. So, you know, decide on those things and then write them out and rewrite them and think through the process that way.
Can I add something, Jim, real quick?
Yeah.
I think one of the things, because you come out of journalism, you'll appreciate this for sure, is, you know, one of the things we run up against is that there's so much jargon in our industry. And to be able to write stuff down and get past the jargon in plain everyday English is also really critical. I've seen so many projects where we go in, not we, but, you know, people have gone in, and there's so much jargon about decisions and information, don't really know what that is. It's that process of really thinking it through and writing it down in plain English that helps.
Thanks, David. Tia, once you've zeroed in on a problem, how do you identify which methodologies are going to be most useful in helping you get to your answers?
Yeah, I've been exposed to a lot of different methods during my career, but I start by thinking about the methods that we already have in our toolbox. What have we already used in the past and it's been a success? Do we have a standard way of doing the research that we actually trust, and does it correlate to market response, which is really important? And if so, perhaps that's the best approach. However, I'm not really shy about asking for help from both internal and external resources. Oftentimes, you know, I'll share the research question and ask suppliers how they might tackle the research, and then we work together to come up with the best plan. Because methodology is really continuously changing, I really think that it's important to make connections with market research suppliers and to read market research books and publications like Quirks and Green Book, and attend market research webinars like this one and conferences that come out from time to time to learn best practices and to make sure my toolbox is really relevant and I'm up on the latest, you know, methods and suppliers. Years ago, we really didn't have access to the internet, so clearly the tools have really evolved over time, and we really have to evolve with them before selecting the right method.
Got it. Jim, can you speak to that?
Yeah. You know, I think that, you know, as a researcher, we would like to approach things from, you know, research questions from a pure design standpoint, oftentimes. But there's a whole nother set of considerations which has to do with the audience that is going to be receiving this information. So in addition to having a methodology that's going to address the decisions that need to be made and the information we need to capture to make those decisions, there's a whole host of other considerations that have to do with the client and the brand team and what they're comfortable with, and what is going to be compelling within the organization. So, you know, for instance, is the client looking for an immersive experience where their team is somehow firsthand exposed to consumers? That might take us into a more ethnographic approach or some sort of co-collaboration. Or is it the kind of thing where they want us to sort of go away and find the answer and come back and present it to them? So what the client's comfort level is, and what kind of experience their team is looking for as this research journey unfolds are also critical considerations to what we do methodologically that go beyond just, what's the right tool to get us the information we need. Because honestly, if you find the right information, but it's expressed in a way that doesn't impact the organization and get internalized within the client's organization or among that brand team, then it's pretty much useless. It's not going to have any impact. It's not going to be actionable. So, thinking about that on the front end is pretty critical to the methods that we end up recommending to folks.
Got it. Thank you. So speaking to the panel now, would you say that the methodologies you might use or recommend today are based on some of the newer technologies that we have access to now?
Yes.
Yeah,
I don't know that. I think that the methodological tool belt has expanded greatly and continues to expand. Even in the qualitative world, the ability to execute things digitally now has just really opened us up to a whole new world of ways to engage consumers, get closer to the moment of brand experience, whether that be through streaming or online panels, people engaging with us over their smartphones. Just, there's a whole host of ways now to reach people. And I feel like you can use technology in ways that's really smart to get closer to the moment of brand experience in a way that's less obtrusive than perhaps even 4 or 5 years ago. So absolutely.
Got it. And I think Tia, you might have shared an example with me prior to today about how a newer technology would help you uncover some information that you might not have been able to uncover, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, I do think there are some newer technologies that we have access to. I would say that, the objective of your research should always drive the approach and methodology used, and you don't want to just gravitate to the newest, shiniest thing. And, there's early adopters who want to do that. They want to be the first to try whatever it is and then report back. But, it's our job as their guide to make sure that we don't do a square peg in a round hole. But on the flip side, there are researchers who are sometimes hesitant to adopt a new methodology that we know is really going to work because they're used to seeing the data and analyzing it in a certain way, and they're not sure how to interpret data that doesn't look familiar with them, right? But there are new tools that we can use. For instance, people have their mobile phone on them all the time pretty much, and they're used to waking up and grabbing it right away. If you want to understand if they're using a product on a daily basis, you can ask a quick question and get right to that, because recall is very tough for people. I couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast yesterday, to be honest. So if I'm asking somebody today what they used this past week and how many times they used it, probably not going to get me, good results or accurate results. How about that? But if I'm using a mobile phone to contact them every day and just say, hey, did you use their product today? They're probably going to remember that.
Got it. Thank you. So regarding some of the newer technologies that we have available to us today, which would you say is the most valuable to each of you in recent years?
I'd probably just say, online qualitative, because that lends itself to so many other things, like having people upload videos and take pictures and being able to recruit all across the country. So it's pretty widespread. You can use it in so many different circumstances.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Online Qual, we tend to focus more on activity-based online qualitative versus, a bulletin board style approach. And, the reason for that is that we want to design studies that feel like social media because that's how people are used to expressing themselves these days. So it's becoming just increasingly natural for folks to share things about their lives in a format like that. So, you know, uploading video, uploading imagery, interacting with other people in a digital space. It's all become very kind of matter of course. It's no longer a novelty. And oftentimes I feel like we can get to deeper insights because people are doing it in the comfort of their own homes. They're doing it on their own time often. And it's a medium through which they're used to communicating. So I would second that point that David made. Online qual is definitely becoming a larger and larger part of our business.
Yeah, I'll jump in and I'll say, you know, online bulletin boards really are allowing us to reach consumers across the world while we're sitting at our desk, right? So we can do nationwide and worldwide qualitative research just as cost effective as local research, and that used to not be the case. Another thing that I would add is I think artificial intelligence is kind of coming a long way right now. I know it's still in kind of its infancy, but there's been places where it's been leveraged. And one of those is in qual research, because it allows you to supersize your qual research. You know, with artificial intelligence, you know, a lot of the new research tools that are being offered by suppliers are leveraging these online platforms in combination with the machine learning algorithms like text analytics, for example. And they can quickly conduct and analyze qualitative research, thus making engaging and understanding hundreds or thousands of people as easy as a conversation with just one person. And so we can get, you know, hundreds and thousands of people's input via mobile or online platforms, and then use artificial intelligence to kind of analyze it and tell us, you know, what it means and where the patterns are.
Got it. Yeah, there seems to be a shift towards more behavioral research versus attitudinal research. Would you say that that's accurate, and could you give us an example of that?
Yeah, it's absolutely accurate. There's really been a shift to behavioral research over the past few years, and I think the reason is really simple. You know, we're learning that what people say and what they do don't always match. I think we don't have to look any further than the 2016 presidential election to find a case study that illustrates, you know, why we're not relying solely on what people say in a survey of or a poll, right? The polls didn't accurately reflect voter behavior. And we're really seeing similar patterns in market research for consumer goods and services. Consumer response in market is not matching up with what we're hearing in research. The foundation of our traditional research really relies on the myth of consumer self-understanding. And I think consumers can express their likes, dislikes, preferences, intentions through surveys, interviews, and focus groups, but they also have a difficulty articulating why they like or dislike a product or brand-related experience. They don't really know how they feel, or may not even be able to express their feelings because they simply don't have conscious access to the information required to give an accurate answer. So I could give two pieces of advice that really come to mind on how do you get to that. And the first one is really relying on recall is not reliable. We really need to capture thoughts in the moment, right? And these mobile and video and those sorts of things are allowing that. Consumer psychologists would tell you that a person's recall is much better when they're in the environment where they normally do a task while they're actually doing, or while they're doing that task. So we should really be observing her behavior or what she's doing and how she's doing it. Sometimes we can ask her to talk out loud so you know what she's thinking, or better yet, and this has been my lived experience, ask her to direct you to do the task. We actually went to someone's house where we did laundry for them, and we told her, you can't do the laundry, but you're going to instruct us to do the laundry, and we're going to do it the way that you tell us, kind of Simon Says. So she sat in the expert director chair and told us what to do. And we were able to go through her entire process. We remembered it because we actually did it. She had to tell us what we had to do. And we noticed that she was always using dryer sheets, but not fabric softener. And so when we asked her about that, and the thing that you have to understand is this woman was very laundry involved. And so she knew how to get stains out. She was on the Tide website. She was really, really a laundry guru. When we asked her why she didn't use fabric softener or liquid fabric softener, she told us she usually put the laundry on and she would go for a walk or do something else. And she didn't want to have to turn on a timer to come downstairs and add the liquid fabric softener. And it was very insightful to us to be there and actually do that, because she had a center post dispenser in her machine that would automatically dispense the fabric softener. And as laundry involved as she was, she didn't know that. We would not have gotten that just having a one-on-one conversation and not doing the laundry with her. The second piece of advice I give is when you're conducting qualitative interviews, it's really imperative to do activities with the panelists. So maybe a sorting exercise, or, you know, having them draw pictures, whatever. This makes the research more engaging and really leads to better insights versus just asking questions. If we observe what's happening when she's sorting or doing the activity, she may not be able to articulate why she did what she did, but we can look for patterns across interviews that help us.
That's really interesting. Thank you. David or Jim, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you know, I think that Tia is absolutely right that, you know, just kind of straight ahead questioning is oftentimes not the most accurate, either because of, you know, recall issues, but I think more often than not, it's just because people don't know. They're not self-aware, as Tia said. And I think the reason for that is people, and if you think about yourself in this way, what people really care about is not our brands. They're not thinking about their consumer lives all the time the way we are. People are preoccupied with many other interests and parts of themselves that have nothing to do with our brands, nothing to do with our categories. And you know, so our approach tends to be in an interview situation, or if we're doing groups or whatever, when we're talking to people, that attitudinal research is to approach it from a clinical psychology perspective, where we're talking to them about what matters to them and understanding their relationship with a brand or the category within that context. In a way, people really do say what they mean, but you have to know how to listen. It's not the same form of listening as you would apply sort of asking them, well, why did you just do that? What, you know, why didn't you add softener? But it's understanding the context in which they put brands and brand interactions into the larger picture of who they are as a person and who they want to be. And if you can combine that sort of understanding with behavioral techniques, then that really is the home run. So I think the story that Tia just told is really informative, because it sounds to me like the way I would interpret it, the way that your team was approaching that is to use the respondent's behavior as the stem for the conversation about her life and why she does what she does. And that's a really powerful 1-2 punch. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for that reason, that's why you're seeing, you know, more and more people become interested in behavior versus attitudes. But also, when you're asking about those attitudes, do it in a way that's relevant to the respondent, rather than assuming what you care about is what they care about.
Yeah, if I could add something to that, I think it's interesting that the past 5 minutes or so of our discussion are really around the fundamentals of research. It's around, you know, what to ask and how to ask it and what methods do we use. It's not about technology and the latest shiny new thing. And I think what's unfortunate in our industry is we're so focused on all the latest new technologies that there's less of a discussion on, you know, what approach to take. Like the approach you took, you know, with that woman with her washing machine is that's ethnography. That's a really interesting approach. But also other issues like which projective technique might work best in this situation. Do we have them write a letter? Do we have them tell a story? Do we have them upload pictures? What projective techniques work better for millennials versus people who aren't millennials, and that sort of thing. So I just want to give a shout out to the fundamentals of the social scientific discipline.
Thanks, David.
It's the first time I've ever heard a shout out to the fundamentals of social science, by the way.
Well, by the way, I hear it all the time from people who complain about our industry being so obsessed with the latest and greatest shiny new thing. And these are people who given up on going to conferences and that sort of thing. And they just say, you know, we've lost sight of the fundamentals of doing really good work.
Yeah. And, you know, going back to the beginning of our conversation, David, I mean, it does, for me, what you're saying goes back to, you know, those initial questions that you have with a client at the outset of a project. What decisions are you trying to make? What information do we need to make those decisions? Because oftentimes I think that the jump to the bright, shiny objects in terms of methodology often happen because people aren't taking a step back and thinking through those questions. They're just saying, "Oh boy, we need to do some digital qual here," or we need to execute this over mobile devices or something like that. Without working through that process, if you stick to the fundamental process, you'll end up with the right approach. Sometimes that might involve new technologies, but oftentimes it doesn't.
Yeah. And my point is that even if it does involve new technologies, what you ask and how you ask it and what projective techniques you use versus you don't use, all that still matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the new tools, right, should supplement good foundational traditional research. And I think sometimes we miss doing the good foundational research, and we're grasping at the tools thinking the next shiny thing is going to answer the question when we're just not doing the good foundation and critical thinking and setting up the research the way we should. Fail to plan, plan to fail.
Yeah. And one other thing on this point, fundamentals, as Tia and David are talking about them, apply to methodology, but they also, in my mind, apply to theory. And I think that the best research traditions are guided and rooted in a theory of human behavior or a theory of attitude formation. And I think it's important for any organization, really, research company or client-side organization, to have some notion of theory that's guiding them. So for us, our theoretical traditions as a company come out of anthropology and psychology. For other firms, I know that it might be different, but we can always go back to the literature, so to speak, the theoretical foundations within those two traditions to think through methodology and how we might approach something. And again, that's really above and beyond, separate from technology. It's still rooted in a lot of work that's been done on human behavior and then on attitude formation. And because of that, we can believe it's true. And it serves as a really useful guidepost.
Thank you. Such good information today. Thank you so much, Tia, David, and Jim, for sharing your insights and experiences with us. We're going to take some questions for the next few minutes, but first we'd like to thank Focus Forward, our transcription partner who so graciously volunteered to transcribe this webinar for free. Focus Forward is just one of our technology partners that we've partnered with to bring a complete qualitative toolkit to our clients. We'll be emailing out the recording of this webinar so you can view this webinar or download a copy of the free transcript at our website, as well as learn about our exciting technologies offered through L&E Solutions at www.leresearch.com. So let's get started with some questions. For the question portion of this webinar, we're going to be turning it over to Elizabeth Wallenberg. Elizabeth?
Hello. Okay, so let's just jump right into this. First question, and I'll just kind of explain, where these questions lie in with the past discussion. So this says for David, numerous trade organizations in the research industry put most of their efforts into articles, webinars, membership, and sponsors pushing new technology. There we go. Anything and everything other than true expertise in marketing research. And then I guess that was more of a comment than a question, but I do have a question specifically for you, David. Referencing back to new technologies, you said online qualitative. Could you be more specific? Online FGs, AI moderated qual interviews, mobile ethnography, various flavors. Could you take an example you've used and describe how it helped you answer the business question?
Sure. And most of the above, the ability to be able to connect with people and have them either log in once a week over a year, or have them for 4 or 5 days from across the country. I'll give you an example. So I do a lot of work in healthcare, and oftentimes I do some work with rare diseases. And so, to be able to understand, I do work with the FDA on patient preference information, patient reported outcomes. So in order to be able to understand the patient experience, it's hard to get them, it may be impossible in a focus group in a city or something like that. And it's a little bit limiting, I think, spending it, maybe 45 minutes on the phone, but be able to have those patients every day for an entire week, logging on in the privacy of their own home, and being able to, ask about their use projective techniques, have them write a story, have them write a letter, have them upload pictures that represent how they feel about the healthcare community, that sort of thing. I think because it allows you to recruit so broadly and allows you to be with somebody for an extended period of time, it lets us use a lot more techniques like projective techniques, which get at a lot of things we were just talking about. So that's an example.
Perfect. Okay, the next question is for Tia. Tia was talking about an AI program that does text analytics. Can she give an example of how that would be used and what company software you use?
I am familiar with this. I went to the IIEX conference, probably, I want to say it was this past June in Atlanta, and you'll run into a lot of suppliers, and this was one of the big trends that was happening at the time. I have not yet, we're doing some in-house work with this, but I've not yet delved into it, but I can give you some suppliers. So for instance, you can do online metaphor elicitation. Protogram offers that. There's video transcription and text analytics that can measure sentiment, and I've actually used this one, is VoxPopMe. So you can go to L&E, do your research, take your research video, load it into VoxPopMe, and it will actually transcribe it and give you text analytics and measure the sentiment. Or you can even do an online thing, which is what I did, where I added a concept and asked them how they felt about the concept. And they actually took a video of themselves giving their first impressions of the concept, loaded it into the VoxPopMe platform, and then it actually transcribed it and did text analytics for me. And I was able to create highlight reels of how people thought about our new idea. Remesh has actually harnessed collective intelligence by engaging groups of people in real-time quals. One of the things that they did was they were reaching out to people at NASCAR events or while they were getting ready to watch the NASCAR race, and they were texting them on their phones. And then the people would text back, and then they were kind of looking at how many hundreds of thousands of people watching the race and the excitement and the ads that they were shown during the race and that sort of thing. And the other one that comes to mind is Heartbeat AI. They do analysis of emotions in unstructured text. I believe they're out of Toronto, Canada. So there's 4 of them for you.
Perfect. And I guess I should also add in, just from L&E's side of things, like Tia mentioned, we can certainly assist you with your project and research needs. And we also, as of actually in August, we have launched several technology partnership solutions as well, and one of those being text analytics. So, certainly reach out to the team at L&E because that is something that we are now offering as well with some of our technology partners that are leading in the industry. And I'm not seeing any more questions come through right at this. Oh, here we go. Hold on. Technology. Okay. This is again for Tia. Do the text analytics suppliers that Tia mentioned have the ability to detect sarcasm? If not, do you have any idea on how this impacts the validity of the translation as a trend?
I know only the one that I've actually worked with myself, VoxPopMe, it actually can because it does inflection in the voice as well. So it can. I don't know about the other 3. I don't have personal experience with them.
Okay, and this is a question, I'd say more so for the group. Do you have more tips or tricks in focus groups to get at an insightful level to reveal those unconscious factors that guide our decision making?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would call them tricks. You know, again, our tradition, the way we approach things, comes out of clinical psychology, and to get to a deeper level, I think involves you as a moderator making a human connection in the room, to create an environment that's comfortable and that people feel like they can open up and express themselves in, and that requires sharing of yourself, you know. And I think there are some who might bristle at that and say, well, that's kind of violating objectivity, but we don't approach things from that perspective. We're coming from a clinical psychology perspective, and you have to put some of yourself into a conversation, and you should treat it as a conversation with other human beings in order for them to feel a certain level of comfort to open up. So beyond all of the projective techniques that we can use that are at our disposal, I think just setting that sort of a tone in a group context. I sort of do a little psych up routine before I walk into the room. After I've been through the guide and I hear all the client's issues and we have the pre-meeting, my mantra before I walk into a focus group room is to tell myself, just go have a conversation. You're just people. And I think talking to folks that way is the beginning to setting a context to get to a much deeper level.
I have several more questions.
I don't know if that's a trick or not.
Sorry.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm just curious, Jim, if you have any thoughts about this. I know you guys, because I've worked with you guys for a decade, do a lot with projective techniques, which are really good at things. And, you know, would you ever do anything as a homework assignment for someone coming in?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked a lot about technology, and increasingly we're using online as a platform for homework prior to a group. And you can do that either on an individual basis. You know, one of my favorite things to do is have a collaborative online activity precede groups. So all of the 10 or so people you have recruited for a group are all doing something. Maybe they're uploading imagery of a category experience or something that's relevant, something that's personal. They're expressing in the digital space. So when they show up and they're meeting each other in the waiting room, they already kind of know each other. You know, oh, you're the one that uploaded the picture of your cat. Oh, you know, she's so cute, blah, blah, blah. You walk into the waiting room and the group's already kind of started. So definitely using digital technology from that. But certainly, I mean, you know, anything really from a projective standpoint you can do in the room face to face, I feel like you can do digitally. Working with guided imagery, we're big fans of doing storytelling activities online, having people write fictional stories that tap into a reality of their lives or experience is another great projective technique. And all of that really lends itself to activity-based qualitative because they can put time into it. And so, yeah, the digital world provides all kinds of opportunities for projective techniques.
I have several more questions that have come in here, so I will keep plowing through. Any take on eye tracking and its role in research today? Are any of you using eye tracking? If so, any tips or suggestions on how to approach this methodology?
I think knowledgeably about that stuff.
Yeah, I can't weigh in on that either. Sorry.
I can. We use it here at P&G. Some of the instances in which we might use eye tracking, and I'll give an old school example that I think is interesting. We actually showed somebody an ad for Febreze Fabric Refresher. This was before it actually hit the shelf, and we didn't know where to put it. So we could put a camera on the folks and see what their eyes were looking at the shelf as they walked around looking for where they thought this might be shelved. And that helped us determine where are they looking and what like items are they looking at so that we could figure out where to shelf the product. So that could give you an idea. So findability is a big use for eye tracking. Some of the other things that you might look at, what if, like for maybe facial moisturizer or something, I asked people to look in a mirror and I set up an eye tracking device so I could see what they were looking at. And I asked them, or I had them either look in a mirror or look at a computer screen with other people's images on there. And I asked them how old somebody appeared to them. Where do they look? Is it wrinkles around the eyes? Is it sagging skin at the jaws? So there's plenty of uses for eye tracking, right? And figuring out where those hot spots are and where people look. So either for your product, or if you're looking for a flaw in, in the face, or where somebody looks to determine if somebody's old. There's all kinds of uses for it, but those are two that come to mind just off the top of my head.
Okay, great. Now I have, okay, here we go. Any suggestions for getting in-the-moment reactions for infrequent activities such as retirement planning?
Yeah, I mean, we used video, or again, online video for that kind of experience quite a bit. We did a study, David was talking about healthcare. We did a study for an insurer that was a year-long digital ethnography of employers, so HR directors and managers, going through the process of choosing an insurance company for their companies. This was tracking them through the renewal process. And, there was a lot of that was in the moment video, where they were talking to us. Basically, we asked them in the diary to record a digital diary video entry and upload it to the platform anytime they did anything related to the selection of their insurance company or renewing with who they had. And that produced all kinds of great moments. I mean, one I remember in particular was an HR manager there with her webcam turned on as she opened her renewal letter from her carrier, which is this sort of moment of truth when you find out what your rate increase is going to be for the year. And, we were there real time, not hovering over her shoulder. That's a momentary thing. So she turned the webcam on, recorded, uploaded it. We captured that moment and all the emotion that was involved in it. And that's a momentary thing. So I think digitally you can get to those moments in a way that you just can't do with face-to-face.
Okay, I have another question here. Love the conversation on bringing back the fundamentals of social science. It makes a lot of sense in the exploratory research sense. Do you have any advice on bringing that into product testing? Example given, taste test, prototype testing, etc.
We actually still do that here at P&G. So we don't always ship things out in the mail to people to try. We actually do some on-site location where people come to their church or their organization as a fundraiser and they do taste test, or they're sniffing something, or maybe they're doing a field test or something like that. We're still doing a lot of that fundamental research very inexpensively in person.
Yeah, and if I could just make a comment about this also. One of the things that's just a key issue for me, and actually I'm thinking about doing a workshop on it, is making sure your qualitative research informs your quantitative research, because so often these are done, in separate categories. Once you get to tape testing or something else, you should have had a lot of really good qualitative research that informs the design. And then another issue around quantitative work, somebody brilliant, I can't remember who, said in market research, when in doubt, have people choose, right? And so there are so many things you can do in design that have been around for decades, around within subjects designs, having people choose between things and the order of things, that can just be enormously helpful. And that's true even in survey work, for a segmentation study.
I mean, to pick up on that, I mean, to me, regardless of whether you're designing quantitative or qualitative, one of my first questions that causes me to think through to analysis, how am I going to analyze the data on the back end, is to make sure that you are building variance into your design. I don't care if it's a number or a comment, but a number and a comment in a vacuum is oftentimes meaningless. And if you're not thinking about how am I incorporating variance, and by variance I mean either across categories, cross-sectionally, these people compared to that people, this choice versus that choice, or longitudinally, this point in time versus that point in time. If you're not building variance into your design, and that could be a taste test, or it could be a conversation about a product experience, then the chances for you to have meaningful analysis on the back end are slim to none.
I want to jump in here for just a second. As David had talked about choice, somebody had asked the question about what can you use in focus groups to kind of get to the deeper emotional piece, and that is one thing that you could use as a tool, right? So if you think about kind of the white elephant Christmas fight over a gift, if you actually had products there and you wanted to understand what people would really want, you can play the white elephant game and give them a choice, and they can fight over the gift and watch it change hands several times, and you'll know which one they prefer without them just raising their hand saying they prefer something. If they think they get it, take it home, they're going to fight for it.
Okay, I have another question here. Do any of you have advice for doing observational research of users in busy and information-sensitive clinical environments?
By clinical environments, what do they mean? Oh, yeah, right. They're not there to answer.
I'm going to guess what that means. I think I can answer a little. I've done some clinical studies in the past, and one of the places that we had actually had a one-way observation mirror. And we wanted to understand if the consumer was using the product as we intended on the usage instructions. It was a very new product, not like anything else in the market. So if you think back to kind of like, maybe like Swiffer Duster, it's not what it was, right? It was a beauty care product, but think Swiffer Duster when it first came out and you had to attach the little duster thing to the fork and then try to figure out how to fluff it and use it just from the directions. In our case, it was a beauty type product, and we weren't sure if they would know how to use it. So we actually had them sit down, watch the usage video, look at the guide that came with it, and then we asked them to conduct a treatment, and we were behind the one-way mirror watching them conduct a treatment to see if they did it correctly before we sent them home to use it 3 times a week, right? We wanted to know, did they use it right? Did they need any instructions? So we understood that behavior by actually being there. Again, you could even hide a video there. One of the other things that we did, we had a device project that we worked on, and I won't say for what category. We actually put a chip inside the device. And so every time the device was turned on and off, we knew we could record it, but the person who used it didn't know the chip was in there. We were able to download that data when it came back, and we got real behavior because we found that some people who told us they were continuing to use the device didn't use it past the first time, and others used it religiously when they were supposed to. But knowing that helped us discard the information from the fraudulent users and keep only the information from the people who used it as intended.
So she did say by clinical, she means hospital, unit, CMU, etc.
Yeah. Well, you definitely need to go through an IRB. I mean, but you don't want to hear about that. That's a super boring process. A review.
Yeah, well, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but we did a study on hospital choice and hospital experiences a couple of years ago, and again, the whole study was done digitally. So, we had people, using their mobile devices to tell us about the experience they were having in the hospital in real time as they were there, and uploading that to our platform for analysis. So, a way to get to those moments when they're actually sitting in the exam room unobtrusively.
And you have a captive audience. Where else are they going to go?
Yeah, right.
Well, I think I'm not seeing any more questions come through right this moment. So, Renee, I am going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. So to the entire panel, is there anything that we might not have touched on that we could touch on quickly before we close today that might be valuable to the people who've joined us?
You know, one other thing I could mention that I didn't earlier, and with the talk of new technologies and new methodologies, and this might tease L&E folks to another panel you're doing, but one of the things that we're seeing increasing requests for are new ways to produce deliverables. So just which needs to be thought about in the planning and design of a study. So on the back end, oftentimes, you know, the old PowerPoint deck is no longer the best way to convey information within organizations. So we see certainly more of a demand for documentary style video deliverables. We're currently working on a podcast right now for a client that wanted an audio only deliverable. Infographics, immersive presentations that go far beyond just kind of a PowerPoint deck. We're seeing all that, and while that's the back end, it's also the front end, because you have to plan for that, how you're going to convey the information when you're designing the study to make sure you're capturing the information in the right way to facilitate those kinds of things. So I think that's another area where technology is having an impact.
Thanks,
If I
Jim.
were to think about the couple of things that I would share that I think about and am asked a lot, one is about sample size in terms of how many people do you talk to in qualitative research. It's qual because it's small, but the rule of thumb that I always learned from a consumer psychologist was that kind of once you talk to about 10 or 12 people from, you know, the segment that you're interested in talking to, you know, the next person's not really going to tell you anything new that you didn't already hear from the first dozen. And so, you know, a good 10 or 12 people are good enough for each segment that you want to talk to or focus on. The other piece for myself is I often avoid focus groups. I think there's a place for them in research, but in general, you really don't get the depth from focus groups that you get from one-on-one interviews. Each panelist only gets to speak for about 10 minutes during a 2-hour focus group, so you can't get in the depth. They should be used, you know, when your researchers are trying to build ideas for products for the future and not necessarily for evaluating concepts or ideas. I usually do one-on-ones for that sort of thing. But that's just kind of my general, you know, how I've been taught in my rule of thumb.
Thanks, Tia. As mentioned previously, we'll be emailing out the recording of this webinar, and you can view this webinar as well as learn about all of our exciting technologies offered through L&E's solutions at www.leresearch.com. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll be on the lookout for an email invite to the next webinar that we're hosting in this series. We hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you very much.